Joining us now, live from Richmond, Attorney General Jeff Sessions, Attorney General of the United States, former Senator, Alabama, been a guest on our show many, many times over a long period of time. Mr. Attorney General, great to have you with us, sir.
Thank you, John. Good to be in Richmond. Pretty day, a little nippy.
I know it is a little nippy here. Good to have you in Richmond, in Virginia. And I want to go back, just tell my audience, you've been on my show many times, Senator, but the first time we met was in Washington, D.C. at the Federation of American Immigration Conference, the FAIR Conference. This was some time ago, and you gave me a bunch of charts showing how many jobs were being taken up by illegals coming into the United States. And back then, your communications director was Stephen Miller, and we talked out in the lobby for about 10 or 15 minutes. Remember that? And then you came on my show after that.
I did. I do remember that. And, of course, Stephen Miller is the president's counselor now for domestic affairs and is one of the most brilliant young men I've had the pleasure to know. And it's a real development, isn't it, to have someone who's sort of helped me as we architected a honest approach to ending illegal immigration and making the system work in an honorable way that we can be proud of, that protects American interests first, and those kind of things. I hope that we'll be able to make some progress. So we've had some progress already. We're going to make some more.
Well, we have, without a doubt, and you were Stephen Miller's mentor, and now look where he is, so you should be quite proud of that, sir. Let's get to your visit to Richmond today. You're outlining some major law enforcement initiatives, sir. Can you share that with our audience?
Right. Yeah, we'll be meeting with the state and local law officers who will be here, sheriffs and chiefs of police in the region, and we're going to talk about crime in America. It's unbelievable, really, John, how much progress has been made since 1980s in crime fighting. Murder rate is half what it was in 1980. Violent crime is half what it was in 1980. But the last 2 years have shown a real pop in crime. Murder was up 11% last year. That's the greatest increase in the murder rate since 1968. So this is I think we may be making some mistakes. We've got to maintain tough, effective law enforcement. We've got to have our federal officials support and work with and expand the abilities of our critical frontline troops. That's our sheriffs and their deputies and the chiefs and their police officers who are on the streets every day. If we do this right, we can make progress. We need to prosecute criminals with guns, spend less focus on innocent citizens and their right to have guns, but people who carry guns during crimes have a mandatory 5-year federal prison sentence if they do that. We're going to enforce those laws aggressively. The numbers have declined. We need to get them back up. We need to focus on violent crime and this huge drug trafficking, heroin, opioid epidemic that we're having with the surge in deaths from overdoses. All of those things pretend that we're heading for perhaps the beginning of a long-term steady rise in crime that I think the American people are right to be concerned about, and we cannot allow to happen. We cannot give up the gains that we've had over 30 years.
Mr. Attorney General, what would be your specific answers to the crime, the murders in Chicago, which is frightening people off the charts? I mean, if you basically could go in there and set your own policy, sir, what would it be?
Wow, that's a good question. What we know is, John, that good police tactics, good police morale, good police leadership can impact crime positively, can drive down crime. And you see there is a difference, frankly, in what's happening in New York with their murder rate compared to the much, much higher murder rate in Chicago. And a lot of that is directly connected to what's happening. So we had the situation in Chicago and Baltimore and some other places where police departments had made some errors. They've been sued, and the results haven't worked as well as we'd like to see them work when it comes to impacting crime. So I believe we need to support our police to help them use the absolute best, most tactics, lawful tactics. The federal investigators and prosecutors need to assist them because states can't go beyond state lines and police can't go beyond city lines. So we can provide the interstate, international support to take a case in Chicago or Richmond and take it all the way to Colombia or Mexico, for example. So that's the kind of partnership that has worked. It has brought down the crime rate, and community-based policing is also perhaps the most critical factor.
Mr. Attorney General, the mainstream media has been very critical of your decision on last Friday to terminate, I guess it was about just under 50 U.S. attorneys around the United States, saying that you didn't have people in place and various cases would be put on continuance and things like that. How do you respond to that criticism, sir?
Well, thanks, John, for asking that. Look, we've had over half the United States attorneys have already resigned. They're professional, usually the first assistants in those offices, often and normally career prosecutors, often selected by the U.S. attorney who departed, who are running those offices. So when we asked for the resignation of the ones that hadn't departed, of course those same things will happen in those offices. The professional first assistants will step up, run the office until the Senate confirmed presidential nominees are in office. So this happens every election. Somebody printed the letter that Attorney General Janet Reno wrote me to fire me in March when I was a U.S. attorney, and under President Reagan and Bush, and then President Clinton came in and he replaced the United States attorneys. So that's what we'll be doing and have done, and we're going to put together a determined, aggressive prosecutorial team that's disciplined, professional, honest, who are going to work with our state and local law enforcement officers, and we're going to do what President Trump has told us to do. He issued an executive order. It is the goal of this administration to bring down crime in America. And I think that's the kind of bold, clear goal that we want to hear, and we're going to unleash our federal resources in the best way possible to make our cities and streets safer.
So, Mr. Attorney General, just for the record, and like you say, in March of 93, President Bill Clinton under Janet Reno terminated 97 U.S. attorneys around the nation. So what is different between what you did on Friday and what President Clinton and Janet Reno did in 1993? I'm not following the difference.
Yeah, well, essentially it's the same thing. The cabinet people, President Obama's cabinet people, all resigned immediately. They were presidentially appointed and confirmed by the Senate. And so the United States attorneys are presidentially appointed and confirmed by the Senate. They represent an extension of the president's philosophy and approach to crime fighting in America. And so those are being replaced in the normal course of things, really. So that's essentially what's happening. So I do not expect there to be any slowdown. In fact, I'd like to see a pickup in the extent to which our federal resources are directed toward crime and making our cities safer. We've got these. The president also directed us to focus on these international criminal organizations this is a dangerous thing. Mexico is threatened by these huge drug cartels.
Right.
The law enforcement people are often murdered, those who stand up to them. They have wealth, they have power, they have weaponry, and it can happen in the United States, but we cannot allow it to happen. We cannot allow our communities to be in a situation in which criminal elements gain power and threat against the peace and safety. You know, we're seeing a huge increase in heroin overdose deaths, fourfold since 2010. We've got 140 people a day dying from drug overdose in America. It's far more than automobile accidents. The fentanyl that they're mixing with heroin is a deadly substance, and it's spreading all over the country. So we have a new threat from these drug organizations that I don't think we fully recognized yet and are going to have to focus our attention on them.
We are with United States Attorney General, former Senator from Alabama, Jeff Sessions, with us now. Mr. Attorney General, tomorrow's the day the 6-country travel ban, 90-day travel ban, goes into effect ostensibly. You've now got a number of states challenging it legally. Walk us through what is different about this travel ban that goes into effect tomorrow than the earlier one that got struck down by the 9th District.
Well, it is different, but essentially what it does is it focuses on 6 countries that we have serious problems with in terms of vetting people who come from those countries. 3 of the 6, Iran being the most infamous, have been designated for many years as state sponsors of terrorism. That is, the governments themselves sponsor and support terrorists. We need to be careful about taking people from those countries. 3 other countries are basically in just disarray, like Libya, and Yemen and Somalia, countries whose governments are not functioning. Whole areas of those governments are not under even their government's weak control, and we are unable to do background checks on anybody that applies from those countries. So the president said, he mentioned it during the campaign, we need to slow down. We need to figure out what's going on. So he's got a 90-day pause on immigration from those 6 countries, only those 6, which represent about 15% only of the Muslim world population. And we're going to take 90 days. We're going to figure out what we should do about it in the future, what kind of vetting, extreme vetting, he says, should be undertaken before we start it back up again. So I believe this is a perfectly reasonable plan. The new order makes sure that people who already had visas, who already had green cards, are able to move from those countries to the United States if they already had a visa. Iraq has made improvements in their policies, and they've agreed to cooperate with us more. We have at least an embassy in Iraq. We have friendly relationships with the government of Iraq, and we've got soldiers fighting with the Iraqis, so we are in much better position there to evaluate somebody than, let's say, in Libya, where chaos is essentially the rule. So I believe this is a perfectly rational approach by a president who feels it is his duty, top duty, is to protect America and not to create problems for us.
Mr. Attorney General, are you confident that the travel ban that you've written that goes into effect tomorrow is going to be able to maintain itself, or you think there's a chance that the 9th District or wherever they shop this, it may end up with a stay again?
Well, we don't know about the stay. I think there's a very strong chance that the 9th Circuit will not stop this executive order. But they may. It's, as you know, the most liberal circuit in America. It's California and the West Coast is the biggest circuit of all, and it's the most liberal and the most reversed circuit in the country. But I think the first order, executive order, would have been affirmed by the Supreme Court. This one should be much stronger on appeal than the first one. So I'm confident that sooner or later this thing is getting to the Supreme Court and it will be upheld. The statutes of the United States and the Constitution gives immigration enforcement to the federal government, basically to the chief executive, the president. There's a specific statute that says the president, if he can bar any individual or group of individuals who he deems may be detrimental to the interest of the United States. He's been given that power. It's really a duty. He has a duty not to admit people who might be dangerous to America. He's fulfilling what he promised. He's fulfilling his duty. He's doing it in a lawful, responsible way. And I feel very strongly that it should be affirmed, and look forward to aggressively defending these statutes on behalf of the United States government.
Mr. Attorney General, let's go to surveillance in Trump Tower. I need to ask you this question because the president said in those tweets he thinks he was under surveillance. Detractors are saying there's no evidence, but we have transcripts, phone conversations by former NSA Director General Michael Flynn and others. So obviously they got that somewhere. Where are we in this whole thing?
John, I recuse myself from all of that because it relates to the campaign. I've done nothing that is in error or wrong with regard to the campaign. But if you're involved in the campaign, and we're involved in the Trump campaign, according to the Code of Federal Regulations, you can't investigate and be responsible for investigating or even prosecuting anything that arose out of the campaign. It's a pretty clear rule, just a blanket rule. If you're part of it, you can't investigate it. And I've recused myself, and you'll have to ask other people all those questions.
Well, look, that makes entirely sense to me, and I appreciate that answer. A couple more questions, Mr. Attorney General. If you were to look at the Attorney General's office now, and I know one of your top priorities, as you said, is revitalizing law enforcement in the United States, reducing crime. Do you have a couple of specific agenda items that is your top priority, sir? Well,
I believe strongly that we need to move back and increase our aggressiveness in prosecuting gun crimes under federal law. That targets very clearly the high dangerous criminal element. And you probably know, John, the famous Project Exile that began in Richmond. In years ago, it became nationally famous. I remember referring to it repeatedly in the Senate during Judiciary Committee hearings. And what they did in Richmond was they put up signs that said, Project Exile, if you carry a gun during a crime, you're going to be caught. You'll be sentenced in federal court. It will be a mandatory 5-year sentence without parole, and you will be sent out of Richmond to a federal prison somewhere else. And in effect, you'll be exiled for 5 years, plus whatever other criminal penalty you got for the crime that you committed. And they drove that hard, and the murder rate in Richmond fell, and it's been falling rather dramatically since, until the last couple of years. And then we saw in 2016, murders went up from 43 to 62 in Richmond. It was a 40% increase. That's very much unlike what we've been seeing previously, and it just makes the point that we've all got to get busy, and we've got to focus on what is happening here, because the last thing we want is to see a huge surge in heroin. We've got more meth coming in. People now want to sell marijuana at every grocery store. That coincides, I'm afraid, with increase in crime, and it's just critically important that we not let this become a long-term trend of increasing crime. We're also going to focus on these international cartels. That's a federal responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
The police chief in Richmond can't follow a cartel member back to the Texas border and back to Mexico or Colombia. So that's our responsibility, and we need to work in partnership with them to effectively reduce this flow of particularly heroin at very low prices and very high purity that we're finding on our streets today.
That's a disaster. No question. I've got one final question, Mr. Attorney General. We're almost out of time.
Yeah.
I'm going to go forward and then go back. I think you're going to be in office through 2025, I believe, God willing. What does Jeff Sessions, Attorney General, want his legacy to be?
I spent 15 years as in the Department of Justice, 12 as United States Attorney, and I do love the Department of Justice. I think we need to restore the rule of law. I think we need to, we'll have a small role in helping identify great federal judges of high ability, high character, high integrity, who believe and know they should follow the law and not make law. And I believe that the United States attorneys and their prosecutors every day in court need to adhere to those ideals also. So we want to restore lawfulness, respect for law. We want to restore the Department of Justice as a leader and a partner with our state and local law enforcement, not as an entity that's hostile to them, but one that respects, admires, and values the work they're doing every day and tries to develop policies that support them and help them be more effective, since 85% of law enforcement is state and local. And so if we could do that, and then we confront what could be the beginning of a long-term crime trend and reverse that and get it going in the right direction again, I would feel that the Department of Justice has fulfilled a high calling.
All right, we're out of time. Attorney General Jeff Sessions, his legacy is to be returning to the rule of law. Mr. Attorney General, I really appreciate the time. Thanks for being with us as always, and it's always good to have you on, sir, and welcome to Richmond.
Thank you. Great to be here.
All right, thank you so much. This is the John Fredericks Radio Network. I'll be right back.